Hi, everyone. Welcome back to First Principles. Today, we've got John with us, and we'll be talking about the first principles of reading. How are you doing, John?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Saagar. This is
Aw-
a favorite topic of mine. I'm glad to talk about it.
Awesome. Okay. So, for the context of this episode, John, could you introduce yourself to our audiences?
Sure. I am the co-founder and CEO of Iliad, and this has been a passion project of mine for a while, which I turned into a startup at the end of last year. And the goal is we're trying to inspire the world to read more books.
Hmm.
And so the beginning of that starts with our platform, which is available on app stores now, the Iliad Books app, to discover, share, and collect your favorite book recommendations. And we believe that with a little old fashioned word of mouth and this new fancy technology of AI, that is the best time ever to create a recommendations engine for books.
Okay. So, what got you interested in books? Was that like a hobby of yours forever, or was there like a spark moment?
It's such a good question because I don't even remember when books were just introduced in my life. I honestly just kind of grew up in a household where books were just everywhere. They were surrounding us, and I didn't realize that it wasn't typical to have my other friends' parents like read books to them like at the dinner table, or they would read textbooks with us, or we'd listen to books on tape and like on car rides. Like they were just kind of like all around.
Hmm.
So I have to give a lot of credit to my parents for just kind of like inundating us with books. And then I fell out of my habit and my love of reading, I'll say, for many years. And then it really wasn't until COVID that the pandemic lockdowns came and I really got back into it. We had all this free time on our hands. We couldn't go back to the office, couldn't go to parks. I live in downtown Chicago, so pretty much everything was shut down.
Hmm.
Um, and the options were limited. So instead of uh, binging Netflix and drinking wine for the rest of the year, I'm like, I need to do something a little more productive. And I've had this stack of books next to my bed that I was neglecting. I'm like, all right, when am I going to have a better time to read a lot of books?
Yeah.
And then, yeah, that year I just read one amazing book after another. And then 45 books later, I'm like, wait a second, this is like, I don't want this to end. And I want more people to enjoy and
Right.
love books. It was such an enriching experience. And so I've just been thinking from like a first principles perspective of like, how can we, is it possible to build a business and is it possible to build a product that encourages people to read more? So
Okay.
that's really the question I've been trying to answer at Iliad.
Okay. Can you give us, I don't know if this is going to be comfortable or not, but like a historical perspective, because a book is a technology in a way. It wasn't like always
Yes.
around, and so is
Yeah.
learning to read. So give us your takedown on like how that happened.
Yes, totally. Wait, did I tell you that books are a technology or
You
did
did,
you?
you did. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You
Okay.
did. Yeah.
Great, great. I was gonna say because I had that idea like a few months ago anyway, so I'll talk about that for a second. So um we even have to go back. I go back to the book, The Iliad by
Hmm.
Homer. And so that was really the first time in European history that they were taking spoken language, word of mouth stories, and actually writing it down, taking the time to preserve it for the current and future generations.
Hmm.
And so I view books as a technology for the mind. It is something that allows one person to be able to communicate. And there's so many communication technologies out there that we think of like, synchronous phone calls and, using audio. There's async, there's texting. Books are a communication device for the author to communicate an idea to the reader. So to me, yeah, I see such tremendous potential in the power of books. And that's partly because books are both technology, but I also believe it's a form of art. I mean, books really act as a form of self-expression for great writers.
Hmm.
And there's often more meaning in the words behind the sentences, behind the paragraphs that really can't be conveyed in just in just verbal expression. So, anyways, I see um, a lot of benefits in framing books as technology, and yeah, I think there's definitely been more technological advancements to produce more books. Obviously, like the Gutenberg press was huge for making it easier to replicate one book to a million books.
Mm.
And you've had several other innovations over the past, really few decades. Look at Amazon then being able to buy books online and then having books not just written on printed ink, but then digital ink with ebooks and then being able to listen to them. I see and we could talk about this for probably hours after, but like I'm also asking, like, what is the next technological evolution of books? Is it always just going to be reading and consuming the exact words that were written down, just in different formats, or is there going to be a more maybe immersive, engaging interaction with the ideas in that book? So, yeah, I think it's fun to think about how books are form of technology, more than just paper.
Could you speculate though on the last part you talked about, like how it could be more immersive, apart from what people do? And it is a very solitary activity as well. Like, you need to kind of focus. So how do you plan to merge that with more
Yeah.
immersion?
Yeah. So, man, so I'm just going to ask a bunch of questions. I don't have a perfect answer to this,
Hmm.
but um, if we think from first principles that a book is a one directional conversation of the writer to the reader,
Yeah.
what about making that bidirectional and being able to have the reader ask questions to the author, quote unquote, while they're reading the book? And so I've read, I like to read a lot of history, a lot of philosophy, a lot of economics, really all kinds of books, but there's a lot of the writers that I cannot speak to anymore because they are no longer alive. And so I would love to be able to ask questions to Plato or to Nietzsche or to John Stuart Mill
Mm.
or to Tocqueville. Like, what did you mean by this phrasing here? And, Plato, do you think that that analogy makes sense to 2024's environment today?
Yeah.
And that would be a super fascinating idea for how do we make the conversation that books are supposed to facilitate an actual conversation.
Okay. Well, my completest fears are coming up over here because the reason I like a book as opposed to just like various articles on Wikipedia or wherever is because it doesn't have the option of hyperlinking. Now, it's helpful when I'm doing research and I don't intend to read cover to cover, but I have this inclination. Like if I start a series, I actually note down which season and which episode I'm on
Yeah,
because I want to like finish it. The same thing with a book. Do you think that's going to take away from the whole cover to cover experience, or is that even important?
honestly, that's a very good point. And that's something, I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but one of the best things about a book is that, especially like reading a physical book, sitting down with it, is that there's no screen there, and it's like it's minimal distraction.
Mm.
It's just pages with ink on them, and you're processing it, you're thinking about it, and you're turning the pages. And I could definitely see, with how distractible humans are today with our phones, our devices, our notifications, that like, oh, this paragraph has a hyperlink in it. Let me click on it. And then next thing you know, I'm never finishing the book because now I've just gotten too distracted. So that's definitely a concern that's totally valid. But yeah, I mean, I'm curious to hear from you. Like, what benefits do you get the most out of books?
Oh God. I mean, I have to confess, one, I'm a slow reader and I'm still working on
Same.
it. And that's because you're same. Okay. Well, that
Mm.
started late. And then once I'm like, let's say 20, 30 pages in and I read with a lot of intent, I'm exhausted. So then I have to put it down and then start again. So, but the benefit is like, it's like reading a thesis, like essentially about a particular area, really mining into the person's mind in a way. And of course, I'm mining whatever he's giving me or she's
Yeah.
giving me. But my thing is just to have like a really long conversation, a one-way conversation, and it's not fleeting idea that goes deep if it's a
Mhm.
good book, if it's presented in a certain way. So
Yeah.
that's what I get out of it. It gives it, gives me some discipline. I've never been interested in fiction for some reason. I've not read a lot of fiction, and Godfather is good. I've read that, but
Oh, The Godfather is, I just got to interject, one of the best fiction books I've ever read. To
yeah,
anybody who's just seen the movie, go read the book. It
yeah,
is incredible. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I mean that pretty much does it for me. I'm sure I'm selling myself short over here, but now you tell me.
Yeah, well, so I totally understand. I'm not the fastest reader for sure, and I definitely get distracted probably more than I would like to admit. But there's nothing wrong with like pausing a book for a little bit and like maybe reading something else and then coming back to it. So I don't think it's necessarily like the speed that you finish the book. For example, so I've got the Creative Acts by Rick Rubin here, um, and this book, it's very easy to read. It's extremely approachable.
Hmm.
But some of the ideas in here were like so like mind melting to me that I had to step away from it for a
Yeah,
little bit. I had to like really process it, and then I actually had to like think about it and like live in the moment weeks later and like try some of these practices that he's talking about, and then come back and finish it. So I think it's totally fine to like not finish it too quickly. But at the same time, I recommend to everybody, just read what you're just insanely curious about.
hmm,
Like if it feels like work, then probably shouldn't be doing it. But if you read because you're like you have to know more, you
yeah,
have to understand what they're trying to articulate. Um, you go to bed having these questions, like that's what you should read. And
yeah.
so when you find those books, and I felt like I really got into that in 2020. Like it felt like I couldn't read enough books. And so whatever pace you read at will just be a reflection of how curious you are in what you're reading.
Yeah, the enough book spot, like that's a thing. Actually, let me backtrack. Mass literacy is obviously new, right? I don't think it's more than 300 years old. The
Mhm.
mass literacy.
Yeah,
So perhaps the culture is still very young when it comes to reading. Does that give you some hope, or you think it's going downhill?
man. I was gonna say that I was very optimistic. There's two there's two schools of thought here.
Hmm.
One is that I mean, for the first time ever, like we're seeing some countries and some people who had extremely low literacy, and especially in the lower socioeconomic classes, become literate at a mass level and very quickly.
Yeah,
And you have to say that, like, yeah, I mean, honestly, for all the downsides that the internet and social media have had, they've probably taught more people how to read
yeah.
than anybody really gives credit to. I would actually love to see that study. I don't know if it's out there, but like what percent of people have learned English from social media and from Netflix?
Yeah.
Um, and several of my coworkers have, frankly. But at the same time, there's so that's a huge improvement, and that can't be ignored. But at the same time, the literacy of like ideas, I'll just call it, like the literacy of um, complex thinking is it seems to be going down,
Hmm.
and that's a different form of literacy, um, which is you know there's the ability to read and process a sentence, and then there's the ability to like grapple and process the ideas that the sentence is saying.
Yeah.
And that form of literacy it seems to be going down, and that's my subjective observation, and that's ultimately what I'm really concerned about.
Why do you think it's going down? Is it because of the noise and the notifications, which you can use a D&D option on your phone if you want, but it requires some more discipline?
I mean, ultimately, this is actually like this is almost like more of a philosophical, like spiritual question. But the reason people process these ideas less than they should and really have um, whereas literacy when it comes to like hard thinking is
Mm.
because life is hard itself, and to really live um, life that you want or maybe should, you have to ask yourself some like really hard questions. Um, but you can't if you don't sit down to actually think about what's important to you, then you can go years, if not decades, with just being distracted by what everybody else is doing and chasing status and, going into fields of study, your careers, your lifestyles that ultimately you wake up, you're 45, you're 50, and you're like, wait a second, I wasn't happy with any of this. What am I doing?
Yeah.
So it's actually just hard for people to like really ask themselves what they really want. And instead of asking hard questions and thinking about the hard decisions in their life, it's so much easier to get like easy reading and like cheap dopamine and easy political analysis and easy hot takes and mindless scrolling. Like those are all like easy things, frankly. So to me, it's not surprising that people might be able to read more sentences, but they can't process the hard ideas as much.
Do you think a certain person or a populace would be more susceptible to propaganda if the serious reading is not there at a level that
Oh,
you'd like?
yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's ultimately that's the only real defense against propaganda
Hmm.
is having a citizenry that at the individual level, they are all reasoning for themselves, and they know they can make judgment calls on what's right or not, or what's good or not. Um, and so if you have a really well studied, well informed, strong judgment populace, then propaganda really can't work.
Hmm.
But if you have a bunch of people who are quick to trust everything they see, they're quick to react to everything, they're quick to become tribal and classify everything as political, then yeah, it's actually fairly easy for propaganda to spread faster.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also not just like propaganda in the sense of like a totalitarian government or an authoritarian government really
Yeah,
shoving things down your throat. It's also on a family level, on a tribe level, on a region level, things that are around you. It's accepted as true, but nobody really knows why.
totally, yeah. And that's the importance um, of making it safe to ask questions. And um, there's certainly environments. I feel like when I was younger, growing up in the '90s, I feel like there was a lot more like questioning and like curiosity, like open curiosity, in like classrooms and like the neighborhood I grew up in, my family. And I feel like now, um, it almost feels like questioning and curiosity is like not as a default behavior for people.
Hmm.
And then some people like take offense to them, or it's just like it's harder to like introduce into conversations. And so that has the downside of then people just don't, they're not as curious, and it's not as socially acceptable to be curious when you first meet someone.
Yeah.
And I think that's a downside for all of us, frankly.
Do you think curiosity is a default in the human condition or it needs to be learned?
Um, I want to say yes. My quick answer to that, my quick reason for that is basically like go look at babies, and pretty much like anytime you can see a behavior in a baby, that's
Hmm.
pretty much the default. Babies are and toddlers are extremely curious. I mean, they are just they're trying to learn who they are. They're trying to learn what's happening. They're trying to learn why their diaper's hot. I mean, like they're just curious about everything in the world. So yeah, I do think that is the default for everybody. And then it just brings up the good question of like, well, why do people become less curious
Hmm.
over time? And then, you could then ask, well, are they becoming less curious, or are we socialized to not openly, outwardly show our curiosity? And we actually still are as curious. I feel like I'm more curious now than I've ever been in my life.
Hmm.
Um, and so I try to, I'm constantly questioning things and constantly coming up with ideas with others around me, whether it's family, friends, coworkers. Um, so I think we should definitely try to support people who are asking maybe like original or first principles questions. I mean, that's really how we make progress, is being able to identify the few unspoken truths and turn that into a mass movement.
You said socialized to hide their curiosity. Now, what do you think are the like the carrots and the sticks? So, what are the sticks over here? Like, people will be chided if they ask too many questions, or if they are, I don't know, like how does that socialization work?
I mean, I think it can start with some fairly simple examples of, I've had young kids around me ask a bunch of questions, and I'll answer them as much as I can. And I frankly, I love their curiosity. But then I've seen other people interact, and they're like, "Look, I don't have time for your questions right now," or "I don't know," or like, "Please do your chores."
Yeah.
Which, of course, you can't just sit around philosophizing all day. You do have to go tend to other things as well. But I think some people just don't realize that, like, maybe when kids are asking questions, like, that is their way of, like, downloading reality into their brain.
Mm-hmm.
And if you cut that off early, then it might just signal to them that, like, okay, well, being curious and asking questions is not going to strengthen my relationship or get me fed, or it'll get me in trouble. So I think there's just, like, maybe just little things like that, that's you multiply that by a million, and then through other people. And then you also, I could go totally going down a tangent right now, I'm sorry, but, like, then
No, go ahead.
the education system and classrooms, I feel like I was asking a lot of questions in, like, elementary school. And I remember, like, getting pulled aside, I think it was like third grade, fourth grade, that I needed to let other kids ask questions before I had a question, which is fair. But then, like, at some point, like, you know, classrooms, like, really don't have a lot of open um, conversation and discussion amongst, like, the kids.
Yeah.
And that's where I see people, like, developing their own perspective, and
Mm.
then they get to test the articulation of that perspective, and then others get to react to that, and then that helps you form your views and understanding of reality. We just don't. Our school system is not really designed for that,
Mm.
which I find to be a little disappointing. It's just so much more memorization, and that's what I find so fascinating about books, is that it does feel like I'm having a conversation in a way, or at least somebody's having a conversation with me, and I get to benefit from that. So if our schools were based more on a curriculum of reading great books, I think that would actually be more beneficial.
Okay, so the memorization part is important because don't quote me on this, but I think Socrates or Plato or whoever, I mean, this is like, I don't know how many degrees of sources removed, but I heard that they were not big fans of writing. It was coming up and they thought it's gonna like compromise human memory and some kind of a mental function. They might be right, but like I don't like. Do you have any comments on that? Because I think, of course, with reading, learning to read and write, it whatever the downsides were, the upsides are pretty high. But any thoughts on this particular topic?
Yeah, yeah. I've got a few thoughts. What do you think? Let me ask you. What do you think um, are the reasons why people shouldn't read?
Oh, I'm totally pro reading. So,
Yeah,
but yeah, let's say the only thing I'd say is if we have things like really deep podcasts
yeah,
or like series, which,
yeah,
like a PBS documentary, but that goes on for 25 hours, I think it's more richer. And I
yeah.
think one has to sort of do less work in order to form images in their mind. Now, obviously, you are giving up something, but like somebody who's not started at all, that
Mhm.
might be a push. That was not possible in the past because of bandwidth limitations, and it is possible now. So that's going to be my only Steelman argument. But other than
Yeah,
that, I'm on your side.
yeah, yeah. And there's certainly, it can certainly be taken too far. So um, the the way that I think about, like, the benefit, or at least, like, the balance of reading and writing, is that um, you want to live a good life.
Hmm.
In order to live a good life, you have to think about, like, first principles of, like, of living, which is, amongst many things, thinking and feeling. And so you can certainly, I mean, just waking up every day, like you already like feel emotions, you start thinking, you go throughout your day, you have millions of thoughts, millions of feelings every single day.
Yeah.
So that's going to happen no matter what. And so I've heard some of the arguments about like, if you read too much, then you're not doing enough, or you're not like learning by experience enough.
Yeah.
It's actually, I find that to be the wrong framing, because we're all experiencing life just every second of the day, no matter what. We are going to get a ton of firsthand experience. And there's also, I mean, there's certainly decisions and career paths where you get more life experience than others. I can say right now, as a startup founder, oh my God, like the amount of life I have experienced this past year it feels like a decade. It's crazy. It's crazy in a good and a bad way. Like, it's just unbelievable. Like the ups and downs, and like the questions and the roller coaster. It's wild. It's made me a better person for sure. So I've gotten a lot of great firsthand experience this year. However, I have been very intentional with the books that I'm reading this year, that I'm trying to pick books where I can get really great secondhand experience
Hmm.
from reading. And so I've been reading, there's this one book in particular that I've been reading recently called The Entrepreneur's Weekly Nietzsche. And so it's Nietzschean philosophy applied to startup founders.
Right.
And that that reading that book has been incredible. I'll call it like secondhand experience of like how Nietzsche viewed the soul and the spirit of living and trying to do original things. I think if Nietzsche was around today, I think he would definitely be pro startups and at least like pro creation and pro entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Um, and so like reading some of these books as like secondhand complementary experience to my daily firsthand experience is incredibly valuable. Um, so I think just reading helps you think better, helps you feel better. I think reading literally makes you more human. And so that is, to me, the biggest reason why you should read. But then obviously, anything can be taken too far. And this is a little bit of Aristotelian ethics here, but you don't want to just sit in your house and read books all day. Like, you do want to go out and experience life. And there's also certain books that you just are really not just worth reading. I mean, it's the same thing with any form of any product, any service out there, is that there's some that are orders of magnitude higher in richness and in depth and quality and diversity than others. And so life's short. You do want to spend time with the books that are going to provide you the highest impact. And so that's a long way of saying that, like, you shouldn't read books that are possibly going to have a negative impact on your life, or at least the opportunity cost of reading mediocre books is very high, because you could be missing out on a life-changing book.
Okay. So I'm assuming that, before, because paper was expensive before the printing press, and literate people were few and far between, and they, of course, had some kind of a mastery over something.
Yeah.
They also had like a more sort of Renaissance man perspective on a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not, I like specialization, but I
Yeah.
just feel it's very limiting if that's the only perspective I have on everything. So
Yeah.
I don't know, but
Yeah.
more people are coming in. It's good that they're coming in, but then we need to be selective about what we expose ourselves to.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what's the mechanism that you would suggest in order to be that selective?
Okay. This is a phenomenal question. And I would say ultimately you want to follow your curiosity, and you need to follow your judgment. And those are things that you build up over time. But to start, I would say, like, you can waste a lot of time, a lot of years reading a lot of books that are not worth your time, and don't help you generalize, and they don't help you see other perspectives. They don't help you pattern match.
Yeah.
And so, frankly, like, what I just did at first and what I just recommend to others is, like, go find other, like, well-read intellectual people, or just curious people out in the open. And they often have spent the time before you did to read a bunch of books, and they've read a lot of good ones and bad ones, and see what they recommend. And honestly, I find that to be like one of the just easiest trusted methods for like where should I start reading?
Hmm.
And so there's a lot of people out there today. If you know the Founders Podcast by David Senra, I mean he's on a mission to read 1,000 entrepreneur biographies,
Hmm.
and I've told him this before, but I think his curation and his taste making ability is like undervalued. Like he has spent so much time and saved me time, frankly,
Hmm.
of like which books are not worth spending the money or the time on. Um, and I've used him basically as like a model, as a filter to say like, all right, here are the books that like I have to read for entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Same thing with philosophy. Luke Burgess is someone that I follow. Love his book, Wanting. He's got there's so many philosophy books out there, but he put out this really great list of, I think it was like the 2 or the 3 most important philosophy books from every century, and like that's just a great starting point for anybody. And so there's just a lot of other. It's like if you think you're curious, there's lots of other people who are curious who've spent the time to find history's best books and just start by seeing what they recommend.
So stand on the shoulder of giants to
Exactly,
get started.
exactly. On
Okay.
on the shoulders of great curators. Yes.
Okay. So in the food industry, they have this thing of connoisseurs, right? So they don't necessarily like cook, but they
Yes.
they they have very refined tastes. It's kind of similar thing, but in the world of
Yes.
books. And it's a good
Yes.
combination of elitism and populism here because you can have tastemakers and trendsetters, and then of course you can have different forks and branches coming in.
Yes.
So okay.
Yeah. So and this is, I'm glad you asked that, but this is something that I've identified as a problem, and this is a gap in the book space where, um, in order to like, it's super valuable
Mm,
for, not I'm talking about like the industry side, but in the publishing world.
mm,
If you have a successful book, it's because that book eventually got product market fit and it generates word of mouth.
yeah,
And the
yeah.
books that do not get product market fit don't get word of mouth. And it's often what's happening at the microscopic level is you have a few influential tastemakers find the book and they promote it.
Mm,
And they've built up a reputation or a tastemaking ability and an audience that can get that book from 10 sales to 100 sales to 1,000, and then it's off to the races. And so that's not just valuable for the author and the publisher to sell books. It's also extremely valuable for the readers. Like we are looking, just like people in the food industry are looking for like what's a great restaurant to go out to, what's a great wine pairing for this. Connoisseurs play a lot of value there, but for readers, it's also tremendously valuable. I mean, if you can tell me which book I should start with, or this is like the best new literary fiction book of the year, then yeah, I'm gonna pick that up. And you've saved me a lot of time. And from wasting money as well.
mm.
So like really talented, tasteful curators are super valuable in the ecosystem.
Okay, I have a slight devil's advocate question here. So
Yes.
if the goal is to make individual citizens full citizens, which was the original goal of education, now it gets mixed up with it's not getting you jobs. That was not the point of it. But anyway,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
if that is the goal here, with this kind of a methodology, how do you prevent people from essentially just declaring affinity to a certain class or a certain group? And I'll tell you what I mean. There are finishing schools. There were at least, in the yesteryears, and the way you hold wine glasses like this and not like that, right? But I don't know. I think the real flex is to learn how to use what the gentry says to use the hold the wine glass like that and still do what you want, because that's, I think, is like some kind of a weird like integration of whatever you believe in after learning everything. So how do you get people to like, I like, let's say I like Naval Ravikant and I read every book that he's recommended, but then I am not Naval, I'm Sagar, right? There we go. So what do you do then? Like, how do you push the envelope a little further?
Man, that's a good question. I don't know. What do you what do you think?
I don't know. I think I would like, I'll tell you, I'm going in this I'm real Ayn Rand. that's one person I've rediscovered. I still haven't gotten around to reading her full fiction, but I quite enjoy her nonfiction works. And
Mhm.
I saw myself as becoming a spokesperson for her in a weird way,
Ah,
right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
and
yeah.
and now I want to like not be that. So I want to like sort of now find gaps in the argument. But that's I'm just stubborn as a person. But
Yeah,
like, people are happy to just have an affinity group and that's it. And they will just fight for you and it becomes tribal again. So you might
yeah.
know the answer, but I'm asking you to speculate like,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. I understand the idea here. That example is a good one. So I think the ultimate goal is to get to the ability, like you really do want true open-mindedness,
Hmm.
and that does not mean you are persuadable to every idea that you hear 5 seconds ago. That's not good. You do need to know what are the principles that you hold deeply, but you do need to be open-minded to hearing and defending or debating or articulating or reasoning what ideas or what stories are important and which ones aren't. And so I remember um, the first time that I read Karl Marx's The Communist Manifesto, I was a little, I'll be honest, I was a little um, like excited to read it, but I was also a little concerned to read it because I consider myself a fan of economic growth. I think it's like driven so much prosperity in all of society.
Yeah.
And so I was a little concerned that, like, what if I read the Communist Manifesto and it totally changes the way that I think? And like, I'm going to have to, what that really meant, what I wasn't saying out loud to myself was that, like, I'm going to have to change my entire identity if this book is like persuasive.
Yeah.
And I read this, like, I forget how old I was when I read it, but I then go and I read it and I was like sorely disappointed in like the depth of the information included there and the um I was then for the first time like able to like understand fully that this was not an economic manifesto. This was like a political human nature calling out into the void saying that like I'm upset and I'm going to start pointing fingers and I'm going to start blaming others. That's
Yeah.
what that's what that book was.
Yeah.
um and so that was helpful for me to then realize like, okay, you should go read books and authors and viewpoints that you disagree with,
Hmm.
and even ones that like I think it makes you understand and hold your beliefs more strongly because you're able to see other perspectives. And then ultimately, I don't think there's like one right way to live or think, but by having as many great and um, representative perspectives as possible, you can have the judgment to know which philosophy you want to apply at what point in your life. And so, really, if we think of like different ways of thinking, different philosophies as almost like a tool, it's almost like a skill set, then you want to maximize the number of skill sets you have, um, so that you can navigate this thing we call life.
Yeah.
So that's the benefit of like reading all these maybe books that have really gravitated towards a certain group or certain identity,
Hmm.
is that there is a little bit of truth in pretty much any of these groups, whether or not you agree with them or not. And so it's just helpful to understand everybody else's perspectives.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess postmodernism in its original sense, it has the incredulity to meta narratives. I think some of that is true because, people claim that this is the whole truth. Like, okay, one thing about Western culture is like at least after the Enlightenment, they're like, we don't have all the knowledge out there. It's still going to be discovered. And a lot of other cultures don't say that. They're like, you have everything which is to know, it's already there. So do you think that cultural, let's say, basic assumption changes people's, proclivities to reading more and not reading more?
I think it definitely, I think it definitely changes what they want to read.
Hmm.
It probably there's, I definitely think that there's some people that will read a certain type of book, let's call it, Ayn Rand or Marx or postmodernism, and then they end up like digesting that, and it becomes their identity.
Hmm.
And the problem with that is you then start selectively reading books and ideas that promote your identity.
Hmm.
And then really, if people, didn't hold those kind of identities as strongly, and instead they had more of an identity of like, I'm going to be open-minded, I'm going to be well-read, and I'm going to have the ability to understand and communicate with anybody, no matter what their identities are, then that would be much better for all of us. So yeah, I mean, definitely people will read or watch or listen to anything that promotes their identity if that's their most important aspect of their life.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have a mental model of Aristotle's eudaimonia? And you've alluded to that in like one of the conversations in the past, but it's like, what's the opportunity cost between depth and breadth in that way?
Yeah, yeah. Oh man, I don't have a great answer for this, but I would say that I can't, I don't think it's really, I've never really met anybody who's great at just one thing and they're like mindless about everything else. I've actually found that almost all the people that I've found to be like great
Hmm.
at one or two or three things, they are also actually like fairly well informed about many things. Um, and so I think I'm not even sure if I believe that people are true specialists. Like
Hmm.
I don't even know if that exists. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. And so I've heard people say, whether it's software developers, whether it's, architects, plumbers, whatever, like people that are like truly great at any craft, they understand the other crafts. They understand the other schools of thought. They understand human nature. They understand uh, way more than what's going on there. So I don't think any great specialist exists without having some generalist tendencies.
So it goes, I mean, it cannot be sort of decoupled. It is what it is.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I honestly, I don't think it is possible to like truly decouple it. I do think it is possible to go to generalists. I will say that, and there's definitely like a tendency um, to some people like over philosophize, I would say, and they just like sit around and some of my best friends, frankly, they love to just like talk and debate and ask questions, which I also love doing.
Hmm.
Don't get me wrong. I think that's part of the reasons they do it with me. But I know that like you can't, like we have to like get to work. Like
Yeah.
we actually have like things to do. Like life is happening all around us. And so if you are just a generalist and you're not actually like a practitioner in anything, then you're also missing out on just the life experience you get by doing. And you learn, I mean, obviously you learn by reading and thinking, but just by taking action, you will receive responses in society.
Yeah.
If you get rejected for a date or for a job or for fundraising, or if those go the opposite, they're all very successful. That's you learning and understanding, how to do something better, and then you think about like why that really happened, and is that something you want more of? And so anyways, you have to take action in life to also receive information. You can't just read to receive information.
Okay.
So long story short, you can't be just a generalist and you can't be just a specialist.
And I'd also say that, this debate, I'm just thinking out loud here, it's valid in a society which is complex enough, but still static and stagnant. And I hope we never live in a static and stagnant society. It ascends,
Yeah.
and that means creative destruction. That means respecializing. So you
Yeah.
need to have that, I think classical education that way is the best education to have, because then you can add and
Totally.
subtract skills as you want. So
Totally.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. It would be a really scary place if we get to a static society, because
yeah.
static societies are actually only
Violent.
static. But yeah, they're only static temporarily.
Yeah.
They quickly, if you go from growth, which is positive sum,
Hmm.
to stagnation, zero sum, quickly, some people's momentum kept moving forward while others is moving backwards because it's zero sum. So then people start reacting in a bad way. and then it starts to become negative sum through recession, through depression, through violence,
Yeah.
war. Yeah. So stagnation is a serious first domino in the domino effect of bad things.
Yeah, yeah. There's also the concept of entropy, right? So stagnation
Yeah.
isn't really stagnation, it's deceleration because it's going to
Yeah.
act like that. And if you need to apply pressure to just maintain the status quo, I'm like, apply some more pressure, just grow.
Yeah.
That's a good setup. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's yeah, I think Peter Thiel and Rene Girard, like they have this theory. I mean, of course, not together, but like there are a lot of guillotines on the way down to this. You know?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm assuming, have you read Wanting?
Oh no, I haven't. I haven't.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So, I mean, it is basically Luke Burgess writing about Rene Girard's
Okay.
mimetic theory, and how that can turn into a crisis, and then how that can turn into scapegoating.
Right.
Um,
Right.
that's highly recommend that book. Like, if there's a few books that I've read 3 times or more in my life, and that's one of the books I've read 3 times or more. So, highly recommend that book.
Okay, I don't have my GTD system set up yet, but after the recording, I'm gonna just quickly put that
Yeah.
note. Actually,
Yeah.
I was wondering if you can. Okay, ah, okay. So
Yes.
this is about Rene Girard and his theory.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, Rene Girard, obviously the philosopher professor who really popularized this, wrote about this. Thiel learned it. And then there were a lot of books that Girard had written, and there were some other books that, probably 10, 20 years ago, people started writing about him.
Hmm.
And then Luke went and wrote this, I believe in 2019. So I think it's only 5 years old.
Hmm.
But it's basically like his summary of, like, you don't have to, well, you can read all of the books, but like, here, if you just want to learn mimetic theory and scapegoating in um, in one book, he wrote this book. So
Okay.
highly
Uh,
recommend it.
Thank you. I had a question about something. I'm going to pause that for now, but
Yeah.
I'll ask you
Yeah.
this instead. Now, what are the benefits of reading derivative sources versus primary sources? And sometimes derivative sources can be better than the primary sources. So,
Yeah.
do you have any biases?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's super important to do both.
Okay.
Um, and there's it's super interesting because the primary source is, I mean, to me, it's like it's more than just like a book. It's almost like the first time that the idea was preserved. And so, like, the first time that something is like preserved, there was a lot of, like, there had to be a lot of inspiration and thought that went into preserving it for the first time.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of benefit that comes from reading something from firsthand, from the primary source, where the derivations, if you think about it, I mean, what's the point of having the derivations and the secondary sources? It's because you need to summarize it quickly to tie multiple primary sources together to talk about your new theory. And so, in most summaries, the downside is that you just lose the details, and you
Right.
lose a little bit of the art. You lose a little bit of what the originator was trying to articulate
Mm.
in their first preservation. And so you definitely, I think you want to read both for sure. I don't think I have a good rule of thumb of what balance, but and, like, for example, so I love reading about economics. I've never read The Wealth of Nations. I've read like pages and passages from it, but I've never read the whole 800 page book. And then, like, another one on kind of free speech, On Liberty by John Stuart Mill. That one was fascinating because I'm wondering if I have the book next to me. I don't think I do. But in that book, he starts talking about the reasons why you want free speech. And he starts talking about how, like, censorship it sounds good to some people in the short term, and it's terrible in the long term for everybody.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of the principles, like, made a lot of sense to me. It was like, I don't find any arguments against free speech to be that persuasive. But what I laughed out loud at when I was reading the beginning of On Liberty is that John Stuart Mill was like, he was kind of like phrasing it like, I'm sorry, like obviously this is like a centuries old debate. Like we all know this stuff anyways, but like I felt that it was important to like, document this so we can stop talking about this debate. And he wrote this in the 1850s. And it's like 2020s now. And like we're having all these debates about free speech. And then I go read on liberty, from hundreds of years ago. And this guy's like, I'm sorry, I know this is like a dead debate. Like it's funny to me because wow. Um, like why maybe if more people had read the primary source, had read that book, the debate would be dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's a lot of benefit of reading the primary sources.
Yeah, I think also like, when you're in a culture, and of course most human societies were in such cultures, like, democratic republicanism is pretty new that way, sustained one. It's like, there is a chief, there is a king, right? And you don't want to offend them because they'll kill you or whatever. So, so if you are presenting an idea which is radical, you kind of shroud that, it's been around, it's been in the tradition for a while, and they appeal to tradition, and then they're gonna like, that's like a weird kind of, I don't know, not pincer attack, but what's that word? Anyway, so that
Yeah,
they smuggle that in, Trojan horse, right? So
yeah,
they'll smuggle that radical idea in the garb of tradition and kind of, save their own ass, but also get the point across. So that might some of that might be going on there as well.
yeah, definitely. I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot of I've become a lot more on the watch for how ideas are presented to me.
Hmm.
Because I've noticed that like really persuasive, and I'll call them like sly for lack of a better word, um, promoters of an idea
Yeah,
are not presenting new ideas. They are presenting new framing
yeah,
of ideas.
yeah,
And so the way that those are presented, you have to be on the watch for that because um, it's so easy to like have like meet total resistance about a radical idea, and then it's just presented, framed slightly differently. Same idea.
yeah, yeah,
It's the complete same idea,
yeah,
but just a different framing. And then it slips in because the societal or political trends are perfect for that framing. That happens pretty much every 10 years. Like there's, I won't pick all the examples now, but like every 10 years, I feel like I hear a lot of the new ideas presented, but they're actually old ideas
yeah.
presented with new framing.
Yes, yes. But do you think it's just the old ideas? Have they framing part, yes, but have the ideas also expanded a bit? Is there more content?
So that, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, yes, I do think that there are new ideas.
Hmm.
And um, how often a truly new idea comes is a great question. And in like, what degree of newness is it?
Yeah.
So let's think of it like a new idea right now. Like what's new and innovative on everybody's mind these days?
The humanoid robots. I don't know, like that
And,
maybe.
and that AI, right?
And yeah, yeah,
Um, so this was interesting. I brought it up that example to somebody else about how AI is this like totally new thing, and um, then they're like, yeah, but isn't it just the modern version of Frankenstein? And I'm like, oh, wait, that's really interesting because that was a lot of, I forget the author's name, Mary something, I want to say.
Shelley. Yeah,
Mary Shelley. Um, there was a lot of similarity,
yeah,
a lot of similar themes in Frankenstein
yeah,
of, this, what does it mean to artificially create a life? And then what level of intelligence is that? Is that true intelligence? Is that truly human? Is it true feelings? Is it true judgment?
yeah,
Um, and then what is true? So
yeah.
I'm honestly, I'm sure that, the fact that she wrote that book, there's probably debates about, artificial intelligence framed differently centuries ago that she was having. So, yeah, it's a great question. I don't know how often many ideas are truly original.
Yeah. Well, on a tangent over there, I will
Hmm.
say that, if robots get sentient, and that's the whole point is lost. Because, I mean, the root word robot is like slave, and slaves shouldn't be sentient. It's like, against so many, whatever, ethical rights and all that. But I want a machine. I don't want to care about, oh my God, how's my table feeling? How you doing? Do you want an off? No, I want it to work. So if
Yeah.
they become sentient, I mean, the whole point is lost. That's to
Yeah.
me. But
Yeah. Yeah.
one
Yeah.
abundance of non-sentient labor.
Right. Yeah. Do you say please and thank you to ChatGPT?
I do not. I've made a conscious effort not to because I was getting into it.
You okay? I have made a conscious effort to do it. I want it on the record. I just, I don't believe that they will ever be fully sentient and fully powerful, but
Yeah.
I do want it on the record that I've been
Yeah.
very polite.
Yeah. I don't mistreat my bed. I don't mistreat my doors. It's just that I don't want to like listen, it's like I love having space. And maybe it's just me, like in my own apartment, right? So if there's
Yeah.
somebody else present over there,
Yeah.
who I don't approve of, then I have to be like, frigid and all that. Like I just need to be really poised. This
Yeah.
just yeah, so that's my thing. Like that's my thing with pets as well. It's a weird kind of pet ownership. I mean, you're new to them, you spay them, and it's essentially a sentient thing. So I don't
Yeah.
know. Like I have mixed feelings about that. But anyway. Um,
Yeah.
I was wondering if you can coach me on something.
Mhm.
Um, as I said, I have this massive FOMO, right? And the whole completist syndrome. It's sometimes pain me. I can't watch all Joe Rogan episodes. I just can't. I don't have the time. But even if, but they're like, I don't know, say 1,700 episodes out. Same thing with
Yeah.
books. So
Yeah.
maybe 15 years ago, I really got into like I should be reading, right? I should be reading a lot. And obviously I can't read anything like everything in every language ever printed and still
Right.
getting printed. So that's going to be difficult to keep up. So then I started making a list. And now that list is like 2,500 books. And now, and
Yeah.
of course, I'm not going to be able to finish that. So I have to. Naval Ravikant, I guess, in one of his podcasts, said that you want to focus on fundamental things. What do you do? Like, how do I really narrow my list down? And is philosophy a fundamental for you? And is that would you recommend everybody engage with
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. Okay. Well, great question. Yeah. I mean, so Naval, talking about like you want to find like the best 100 books and reread those.
Hmm.
That idea is absolutely true. Um, and so you don't want to just go for quantity in general. And you should develop the sense of judgment to know when you should abandon a book or when you
Okay.
should pause to it and come back to it or when you should follow your curiosity and go pick up something else. And so this was actually, you mentioned that I had the same problem in, I feel like in school, so many of us were taught like, all right, we're going to read this book. We're going to finish this book.
Hmm.
And I had this bad habit of like, I could not start a new book until I finished a book, but I was like suffering through books that I just didn't care about. And so that is actually a small, just to promote Iliad real quick. That's actually a small feature. I don't know if you can see on the screen
I
here that
can, yeah.
we've included 4 different statuses for your books. And we've specifically included a graveyard status
Yes.
to encourage people, make it more socially acceptable to quit their books.
Yes.
And we included this quote from Ryan Holiday: the best readers actually quit a lot of books. Life is too short to read books you don't enjoy reading.
Wow, thank you. This is so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, so you have to develop that judgment and that curiosity and follow that. And it's totally fine to abandon certain books. But then it means a different question of, what should you read?
Yeah.
Um, I could talk about this all day, but I mean, really, um, you should definitely read things that are going to help you live better. And that could be thinking better, that could be feeling better. And there's a lot of, books that can help you solve a goal as like a specific problem. Some people have said, and I've felt this way, like I didn't know coming out of high school, I didn't know how to like save for retirement. And like even in college, I went to the University of Illinois, pretty good school. I thought I would get more education on like investing and like saving money and being like, financially sound. But I didn't. And I did have one class that was great, I will say, but pretty much else I wanted more.
Hmm.
And so I did choose like specific books. And like one of them, The Millionaire Next Door, talks about how, so much of like how, so much of the millionaire class in America, and this was written in the 90s, are actually not flashy people with big houses and fancy cars. They actually just are frugal.
Yeah.
And they actually live in totally normal middle class neighborhoods, and they save as much as they can and they invest it and they're patient and they don't make irrational decisions with their money that often.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, sometimes you have a specific problem or a specific goal. That book helped me think about how to save and plan for retirement. Sometimes you want to learn for a professional goal. Like I started as a management consultant out of school, and I realized I hated my career choice. And so I'm like, how do I get into tech? How do I get into startups? That's fun.
Yeah.
So I read voraciously. And so I read 0 to 1. And thank God that book came into my lab, because I think it was like on page 83 or something like that. It talks about how management consultants have really never solved any hard problems. And if you want to go make real change in the world, you should join a startup and become an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And I read that book, and I mean, my life changed from that page. So, so it was my curiosity into entrepreneurship, which led me 0 to 1, which led me to 100 more books on startups. And eventually your curiosity, I do believe, will bring you to the life-changing books at the right time.
Awesome. Okay. So in the last section, because this has been so interesting, I have a few more questions, some mechanical.
Yeah.
Listening and hearing for most people is going to be natural. They will just start speaking the language. Reading and writing is a painful process that one has to learn. Like, what does this symbol translate to a sound in my head, and what does it mean? Do you think the aversion to reading after you have to read is because of that initial, for lack of a better term, trauma? And if yes, how do you make that part easy for kids or for an adult who's trying to learn, be literate for the first time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's definitely, I think some of the, going back to what we were talking about previously, of people might be able to read more sentences, they're literate in that sense, but they're not maybe asking life's hard questions in that form of literacy. That's just because it's harder to do so. It's harder to read a physical book, it's harder to read an ebook even, than it is to listen, because listening, you just press play and the words keep going.
Yeah. And
so it's not your mind that is driving the reading. It's actually just the play button, and the audio file is just processing.
Right.
But when you are reading a physical book, or you're reading a book, it is your mind that is driving the words. And so it's definitely, I listen to audiobooks as well, but I think to have like the deepest, richest experience of reading, I'm convinced it's with actually reading a physical book or an ebook, and pausing intentionally at times to really think about what was just said, what was just written, to highlight, to annotate. I highlight the hell out of like every. Let's just open a random page. Okay,
yeah.
I open a random page in this book, and I'm like, look how many highlights I have just on these pages. And then, so that's the first time I read the book. The second time I read the book, I then look at all the highlights, and then I put tabs on the pages that had the most important ideas. And then ideally, especially for nonfiction, if you can then write your reflection on the book, that is really you being able to teach something that you learned, even if it's just to yourself. You're just writing your reflection. But people should think of a reflection as like not just a summary, but you're actually trying to like teach, yourself. You're trying to convince yourself like what you just learned.
Yeah.
And so that's how even if you do listen, you could still do that reflection no matter what.
Right.
So I do think writing after reading or after listening is going to make the experience 10 times richer.
Okay. So that ties into my next question then. What's the best sort of state of consciousness to be in, or the physical state to be in order to like optimally, effectively read? And as per your definition of reading.
Great question. I don't think I've found it. I have, I would say like the average advice I would give is to read 15 minutes before you go to bed. And that's what I would say. That probably can work and should work for like 70% of people. And I would also recommend reading that's something not exactly driven to like your line of work, because you'll probably then start thinking about work.
Yeah.
Um, so I think at the end of the day, you do want to be in a state of mind where you're not like thinking about 17 other things that in the back of your mind, which is what, like, have you ever heard of somebody like taking a break in the middle of the workday to like go read? It's like, that's impossible. That's like, you've got meetings coming up, you've got deadlines, people are pinging you, you can't do it. And so
Yeah.
you do need to like remove a lot of distractions. Nighttime's pretty good for me. There's some people who are morning readers, which I find that I'm only able to do that on the weekends. And then what I would say is probably you'll never be in a consistently great state of mind for reading, but you do want to consistently read. And so I think just doing 10, 15 minutes a day is like, will change your life.
Okay.
And so that reading of 10 to 15 minutes a day will sometimes turn into 1 to 2 hours, and sometimes it'll then put you in the right mindset. Or frankly, it also helps you. We were talking about identities earlier. Like, it helps you then to start identifying as like, I'm a reader. I'm a book reader.
Yeah.
And once you start doing a habit for, what is it, like 30 days or something like that, then you start to really process that at a deeper level. So just getting to 10, 15 minutes a day for a month of a book that you're truly curious about can change your life.
Okay. Is there a joyous way to reading? Because critical reading sometimes to me is like, man, I'm just having a fight with this guy. Let me just listen to this argument. Or is there like you read this, you self-propagandize, and then you come out of it and then you question it? Like,
Yeah.
what's the balance there?
Yeah, man, that's a great question. I so this is why I think it is super important to read fiction versus nonfiction.
Hmm.
Well, let me say this: to read both. They serve different purposes, and I could talk for hours on the purposes of those. But so I found that nonfiction books are basically elongated essays. And what are essays? Essays are typically, here's an idea, I'm going to try to persuade you of my idea, or at least show you my perspective.
Yeah.
And so subconsciously there is a bit of a defense mechanism subconsciously when you're reading nonfiction, because it is the author is trying to persuade you
Yeah.
of this idea. So sometimes I think it's almost impossible to like truly remove any defensiveness, but at least you do want to be totally open to their perspective. That's super important. It's totally fine to like, I've read sentences and like laughed out loud because of how absurd, like some of the, like, here's what I believe and here's the evidence for it. And the evidence is not evidence. And so it's totally fine to like have that reaction. And frankly, it's on the author's job to be persuasive.
Yeah.
And some authors are incredibly persuasive. But then for like more joyous reading, I mean, that's where I see a lot of fiction being so great, is that there's some great stories that like I felt like I was friends with the characters, and I felt like I was like on this fun adventure with them. And there's just joy in that.
Yeah.
So there's definitely different purposes and benefits that come from fiction and nonfiction. And there's also, I mean, you can have joyous nonfiction, you can have defensive fiction reading. I mean, like 1984, Brave New World, there's definitely people, The Fountainhead, there's definitely people who read those with a huge defensive mechanism that they're posturing while reading those books.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you can definitely do both.
Okay. Second last question. I checked out your recommended list on LinkedIn. Books. So give us a few of those books, and why do you think those are recommended? Why would you recommend them?
Yeah. Okay. Great question. I actually should have known that you were going to ask that, and I should have prepared a little better.
Let me also try and open it. I think I might.
Yeah. So let me try to do some of this off the top of my head. So Wanting, just incredibly important book about human nature. Basically, the short summary is that our instinct, just like sea turtles crawl and go to the beach to swim, humans are born imitating immediately. That's our instinct is imitation. The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. I talked about this earlier. This book, I always felt like I was creative, and I actually believe most people are creative beings, but most people don't know how to harness creativity. And this book showed me how to do that. So highly recommend the Creative Act. And then I picked up a friend of mine who runs a small publishing company, Altamira Studio, out in Austin near you.
Hmm.
They wrote this 87-page book called Ask Aristotle. And it's such a fantastic introduction to Aristotle and to his philosophies.
Yeah.
And it's funny in a way because it starts the premise. I'm actually talking with them next week about how they came up with it. But the premise actually just starts out where the main character takes some mushrooms and he starts to go on a trip, and he starts like freaking out. He's on a bad trip, and then he's asking all these existential questions. And he's like, I need to talk to somebody about this. I'm losing my mind. He calls his friend Bill, and then he's like, Bill, I don't know what to do. Like, what is life? Like, I want to live a better life. And then Bill just starts having this Socratic method conversation with him of like, well, what does that mean? Like, how do you feel about that? What do you think it means to live a good life? And what do you want to teach your kids? And they just talk. It's just a conversation throughout the entire book of virtue, of status, of knowing your own story, being able to tell that, and being able to pursue things that make you truly prepared for life. And so, anyways, it's 87 pages, read it in 2 hours. Absolutely incredible. So I'll give a shout out to Ask Aristotle, as well as the Creative Act and Wanting.
Awesome. Okay. But I have to ask you, why The Godfather? That is on your list, right?
Yeah. Yes. Oh my God. Let me ask you, you read it.
Yeah.
It's funny because do you find that like most people that have watched the movie, like didn't even know it was a book?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyways, I think somebody, challenged me to read it sometime. And then a friend like finally bought the book for me this year. And I went and read it, and wow, that book, not only is the story like gripping, but like the characters are like they're so real, like they're so raw. And I found that there was this like, I don't know if Mario Puzo was like intentionally trying to communicate this. A lot of authors do try to communicate more than just the sentences, but it felt like it was a really powerful take on masculinity, on vulnerability, and morality within reality.
Yeah.
And it felt like calling it like a mafia story is like, to me, it felt like this book is way more
Yeah.
than a mafia story. This book is like somebody has been wronged. Their family's been wronged. They even try to leave it entirely, and they find that running away did not actually save them.
Yeah.
And they found that ultimately they had to live up to their conviction, and they had to take some courageous acts to do what they finally felt was right in order to be safe.
Yeah.
So to me, it was almost a sense of like, there's almost a lesson there of like running away is never a permanent solution. It's a temporary solution.
Yeah. Yeah.
But ultimately, if you just run and evade, then the bad guys will get you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost always a tactical retreat. And if you view it as that, that's the best thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Last question, Iliad. Okay. Talk us through about like, how can we get involved if you're taking any interest, any users at the moment? What are your plans?
Yeah. Great question. So the app is available right now as single player mode only currently. On the app stores, just search for Iliad or Iliad Books, and you can start building your own bookshelf of your favorite book recommendations, start rating and reviewing them. And then we also have to get some new book recommendations, we have like a Tinder for books. It's like a Tinder meets Goodreads in a way, with inside the app. And then coming soon, we've found that word of mouth recommendations are just always the most trusted source of recommendations for people. So we just want to build a community that makes it easy to share and receive word of mouth recommendations with your friends, with your family, with influencers, with curators. And then, so the social network and then the curator network will be live soon. And so we have a few different curators that we're having join us to act as those trusted book recommenders. So yeah, check it out. And if you want to find your next read or share it with your friends, see what they're reading, and fall back in love with reading, then download the app and let us know your thoughts.
Awesome. I'm in. Any last words, son?
Let's see. I believe that a life well lived is a life well read. And I hope more people believe that. We'll
Wow.
see.
Okay. Yes. Great. Okay. Perfect. Thank you for coming on. And
Yeah.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you.